Hole in the Basement of the Universe by J. Wilburn. Jimmy Fletcher's weekend with his kids was always stressful. He stayed wound up tight until he dropped them off with his wife again. He felt like he was always on, not anything like the days when they when they were all together. His wife was his stress back then, but he never felt ill at ease until his entire time with them boiled down to a full Saturday and two half days on both sides, once or twice a month, if he was lucky. So his 8-year-old saying the weird shit he said that stressful Saturday threw Jimmy for a loop. He glanced over to see Abby still in front of the TV. Why that mattered in that moment, Jimmy couldn't say, but he felt like a stranger in his own skin around his kids. He leaned over the counter and stared into Curtis's eyes. Didn't like what he saw at all. "Repeat that," Jimmy said. He found he was checking his tone to be sure it didn't sound too much like yelling or scolding. After what his ex said about him in court, he couldn't afford to have his tone misinterpreted, not even by his 8 or 6-year-olds. Let me go ahead and put the dashes in here. I knew I was probably going to do that yesterday. Okay. "Repeat exactly what you just said to me, Curtis." His son opened his mouth, drew in breath, and paused. The boy looked down at himself and turned his hands over a couple times, like he was getting used to his own skin too. There was a lot of that going on in the Fletcher family in those years. All right. Keeping going. Eyes back up on Jimmy. He saw that unnerving thing in his son's face. At first, it was just the look like a kid thinking his dad is out of it. That look Jimmy knew well and was comfortable with. The other look came out from underneath though. Curtis's eyes looked too old for his young face, too knowing, too adult and patient. Those were not kids' eyes staring out of the kid's face. This was not a trait of Curtis. It had changed in an instant. And Jimmy didn't understand it. All right, very good. Let me grab a sip of water. All right. "Is this the first time?" Curtis asked. Now the voice was old too. Still a kid's frequency. Still his kids' high prepubescent frequency. All right, let me see if the computer will let me spell that. It will. All right. Still his kid's high prepubescent frequency, but an adult tone. "Is this the first time I've ever said that to you?" "Repeat it, Curtis. Exactly like you said just now. Repeat it." Curtis nodded his 8-year-old head and said, "I'm translocated. Tell me the date and my markers." "This is my 11th time." "What does that mean?" "Your 11th time of what?" Okay. "If this is the first time for you, then it won't make sense. I have a lot of explaining to do, Dad." "Is that something you heard on TV?" Curtis shook his head, but it wasn't impatient negation. If anything, it was the mature patience in his son's expression that was throwing him off. "I'm going to tell you some things about yourself that I have no way of knowing at this age," Curtis said. "After you understand that I must have come by this knowledge in some other way, then I can tell you where I really come from." Jimmy scoffed and held up his hands. "Is this something your mother said to you, Curtis?" His son squinted and asked, "Is Mom remarried yet, or is that later?" "Is your mom remarrying? Is that what she told you?" Curtis shook his head, a little harder than before. "If she's not remarried yet, then you aren't either." "What are you talking about?" Jimmy glanced toward Abby again. He didn't know why, but he didn't want her in on whatever this strange discussion was. That makes me what? Jimmy asked. I'm 8, 7 years old maybe. That would place Abby at 6, right? Before Jimmy could decide if he wanted to play along with this game, Abby yelled out from the other room, I'm Abigail, not Abby, only Abigail. She screamed the last line so loud and shrill that her voice broke. Curtis rolled his eyes and called out with that weird adult, almost parental patience, Sorry, Abigail, won't happen again. Curtis, being kind and apologetic to his sister, was the strangest bit of a strange morning. Let's say probably the strangest bit of a strange morning. What's going on here? Jimmy barely had any breath behind the question. He wasn't exactly sure who he was asking. His 8-year-old son, who had been babbling on about some video game Jimmy couldn't give a shit about, but pretended he did anyway, turned back to his father. Let's say who moments ago had been babbling on about some video game Jimmy couldn't give a shit about, but pretended he did anyway, turned back to his father. This was like a different person. Curtis said, It takes a few years, but she finally gets over that Abigail, not Abby thing. Just be patient. Jimmy nodded. Right, sure, so... He didn't know how to finish, how to get his son back into that kid mode of babbling on about childish nonsense. Curtis said, This is going to be unpleasant, but I want you to trust me and hear me out. Jimmy swallowed and said, Okay. Curtis went on to list off some of Jimmy's darkest secrets. Nothing criminal, nothing perverse. Maybe stuff that could hurt in family court, but mostly deeply personal secrets. Cringe-worthy stuff that unraveled him coming from his son's mouth, like something he had memorized. He recited all these embarrassing things with no emotion. To his credit, Jimmy sat through it until Curtis finished. Before either could speak again, Abigail, not Abby, strolled into the kitchen, took her cereal bowl, and left for the TV again. In the old days, no way would Jimmy or his then wife allow eating in the living room. This was his one weekend, so he never wasted it on discipline he couldn't maintain the rest of the month. He also wanted the girl nowhere near whatever this was that continued to unfold between him and his son. Who told you all that? Your mother, obviously. Why, though? What's the point of this? Curtis said, Is there any way Mom would know even half the things I just told you? Jimmy thought, but couldn't put ideas together. He was too rattled. How then? Why? Curtis said, You told. He said, You told me many years from now, but you told me what to say this first day, what needed to be said to convince you that I am who I say I am. Who do you say you are, son? I'm me, still me, but a me from years in the future. We start to figure out some of how this happens, but not all of it, Curtis said. What is happening? The boy said, translocation. Jimmy shook his head. Curtis nodded with adult patience and said, My mind travels back in time. I replace... No, that's not right. I temporarily cover over my childhood mind. Then when I finally go back to my time, the younger me wakes back up and doesn't realize time has passed, a little confused but not hurt. I don't understand, Jimmy said. Not yet, Curtis said. The thing is, next time I show up, I'll say what I said when this odd conversation started. You will help me by answering what the date is and my markers. Markers. Jimmy rubbed his face and shook his head. Give me an idea of what is going on in my life, my age, grade, what we are doing, etc. Jimmy started to speak, but Curtis waved him off in a gesture that was way too much like the boy's mother. That was it. That was it, though. The moment Curtis said etc., Jimmy knew something was wrong. Maybe not really the story Curtis was trying to sell him, but he knew this mind speaking to him wasn't 8 years old. Jimmy started to think about multiple personalities. That led him to think about abuse. That led him to be angry with his ex again. Curtis interrupted his father's disjointed thoughts. It's a lot to process, I know. What? I don't understand. Are you coming back to change the past? Jimmy asked. Curtis thought for a moment, but then laughed. It wasn't his cackling kid laugh. It was a polite, reserved adult's laugh. Nothing like that. There will be a few things we have to take care of in my future visits, but we'll get to that. Like missions? Jimmy asked. Curtis shrugged. It'll be easier to explain later than it is now. I just don't. He didn't get any further than that. Curtis lowered his head, lifted it, blinked, looked around. What was I talking about? Time travel? Jimmy said. There was a pause, and Curtis laughed his usual kid cackle. Then he said, "Oh right, level 3. The boy resumed babbling about the video game. Jimmy never told anyone else about this visit or the ones that followed. All right, now here's where I'm going to need to add another scene because I cut off too quickly last time, so there's not enough to sustain the story as it is. Jimmy arrived at the hospital. She was already there. Alan was too. At least now that they were married, that cut some of Jimmy's monthly payments. Monthly payments, only some though. Where is he? Where is he? Jimmy asked. They have him in observation, she said. How did he get hurt? Alan started to answer. He's not physically hurt. He's having some sort of mental... I'm going to interrupt here. Alan, if you don't mind, or even if you do, Jimmy waved him off. Alan walked away like the mature one. Jimmy was still satisfied. She on to explain where, let me split that word, sorry. She went on to explain where Alan had left off. A mental break, raving, emotional nonsense, no, emotional delusions. That's when it clicked for Jimmy. I want to see him alone. There was a brief argument. Alan was about to step back in, but she agreed just to keep the two men apart. Jimmy thought he'd have to argue with the nurses to leave, but they seemed to be in a hurry all on their own. Curtis's 10-year-old eyes darted back and forth with adult levels of fear. Did you translocate in front of your mother? Curtis looked at him without understanding. Maybe this was a mental break. Maybe all the times future Curtis, maybe all the times future Curtis came back into his childhood mind was doing damage. Curtis said, "Dad, I don't understand any of this, and I don't know how to explain it." Jimmy took another chance. Were you in the future and suddenly you found yourself in your childhood body again? The color ran out of his son's face. The color ran out of his son's face, but the boy grew very calm and still. How would you know this is an hallucination, isn't it? It will be easier if you don't convince yourself of that. Explain it. Explain it then. How am I in the past? Translocation, Jimmy said. This is not the first time you've jumped back in this part of the timeline, but I'm guessing it's the first time for you from your perspective as an adult. I don't understand. I don't understand, Dad. Is this another dimension? Jimmy took a deep breath. He glanced at the closed door. Then he began. He told Jimmy the date, markers for what was going on in his life. Jimmy said Curtis's mom had remarried. Jimmy said Curtis's mom had remarried, but Jimmy hadn't yet met the one future Curtis told him he was going to marry one day. Jimmy explained the previous translocations, starting with that strange breakfast 2 years ago. I don't need a quotation mark there. How many times have will I come back? I don't know, son. I don't see them all. Since your mom remarried, I get you more days, usually when they go on another vacation, but still. Anyway, the biggest, how did I word that up there? This is, hold on, I'm just looking for something. I'll fix it later. Alright. Alright, Jimmy arrived at the hospital. Back down here. Okay. The biggest number you've told me is your 17th episode. I come back in time 17 times. I haven't seen you translocate that many times, not nearly. Most of them are still in my future. Curtis stared down at the sheet, wringing it in his hands. That gesture made him look younger than the mind that currently occupied his body. Does Mom know? Jimmy shook his head. You never tell her. Did I ever? Curtis never finished that sentence. Instead, his eyes grew wide and he said, the blackouts. All those blackouts. This is what that was. This accident. He looked up into his father's eyes. Did I tell you what caused this? Jimmy shook his head. The most you've said is that we're still figuring it out. I'm not sure I'm supposed to know yet. Curtis sighed. I can't believe this is what was happening to me all along. I can't believe it. Jimmy patted his son's shoulder. For what it's worth, at least you know you always make it back to your own time, alive and well. This time is no exception. Curtis sighed again and said, "Thanks, Dad. What are we going to do about Mom?" I really freaked them out just now. Now Jimmy sighed. He said, alright, we're almost done with this scene. He said, we might be able to salvage it. She never noticed before, so maybe she notices. Curtis said. This is the day. It was described to me later. We start calling them blackouts, and the doctors can't figure them out. Jimmy swallowed and then said, "Okay, but today we're going to calm your mother down. What I need you to say when she comes in is, 'Curtis, you okay, buddy?' Curtis slumped. He bowed his head and lolled to the side. Okay, let me do a new paragraph here. Jimmy jumped up and steadied his son. He prepared to call for help, but Curtis lifted his face and looked around. "Dad? How did I get here? What happened?" There was no hiding this from her now. I want my mom. Curtis started to cry. Jimmy stepped into the hall to flag down a nurse. All right. So we'll move through these final scenes here. Jimmy pulled his truck to a stop on the shoulder of the highway. "What is it?" His 12-year-old son stared at the old man through his mess of bangs. Jimmy remembered clearly the first translocation back when Curtis was 8. It didn't happen often, but the occasions were notable. This was the first time Curtis demanded that his father help him change the past. It was also the highest numbered episode yet. This one was 25. All right. I don't feel good about this. I've seen the future, Dad. I am the future. I'm telling you, this is the one chance to set all of this right. Jimmy shook his head as a semi blew past them on the highway. If it rewrites your history, does it create a paradox? Does it erase things that have already happened? We've been so careful up until now. All right. Curtis took a deep breath and let it out slowly as he tried to brush his hair away from his face with his fingers, but failed. I'm raging with hormones right now. I forgot how rough being a teenager was. I wish I never had this haircut. Jimmy smiled and said, "I'd take you to get it cut, but once you translocated back, I'd be stuck with an angry teen and an angry ex. Hell, her husband would probably be angry with me too on general principle." Curtis sighed and said, "The hair doesn't matter, but those files do. If we can get them now before they are destroyed, things might be better in the future." "I don't know, kid." Curtis stared at the floorboard for a while before he said, "I'm not old enough in this time to force you to do anything. I could jump out and walk on my own, but I wouldn't get close to the file room of that place, let's say by myself, because we already said on my own. of that place by myself. All right. Moving along. Your mom already has you in therapy for your blackouts, Jimmy said. Your stepmom is worried too. Has your mother even seen an episode? Has your mother even seen an episode? That doesn't make sense because we already know she has. Okay, so I need to make some adjustments here. I try to hide them. Never told her anything. Never slipped up and asked the date or for any markers. But the younger me coming around with memory loss was pretty upsetting for her. Let's say is pretty upsetting for her. Do you ever tell anyone else about these jaunts to the past? Jimmy asked. Okay. I thought you didn't want to know about the future. Jimmy sighed. I really don't. And I can't go into a company and steal those files you want. I barely have visitation with you as it is. I left Abby at home with my wife for this side trip I'll never be able to explain to your mother. Can we just go home? In that moment of strange reversal, Jimmy felt like the child waiting for permission from the adult. That's fine, Dad. Jimmy took the next exit and circled back. They were almost home when Curtis, the 12-year-old, returned to himself. Did I black out again, Dad? Mom is going to freak. She won't let me go to the lake next weekend if she hears I had an episode. Jimmy shook his head as they turned into the neighborhood. We went for a ride and you just fell asleep. Thanks, Dad. All right, we need a quotation mark there. Final scene of this story. Curtis finally lifted his eyes. Life had come back into his body. Here in this time, where Curtis was an adult, his translocations appeared to be catatonic states. Not knowing when the jaunts to the past were going to happen, Curtis couldn't drive, had trouble maintaining a job, had difficulty with relationships, and no one except his aging dad understood what was happening. When they met eyes, Jimmy Fletcher asked his son, "Where'd you go this time?" Curtis smiled. "This time I tried to get you to steal files from my old job. Do you remember that one?" Jimmy laughed, but then it turned into a fit of coughing. When that subsided, Jimmy said, "I didn't know it was your job at the time, but yeah, I remember. Hold on a second." Jimmy left the room, rifling through a few things, and came back with a stack of yellowed files. Let's say a single aging cobweb danced over the top of the stack with the air from the vent above them. Let's say Jimmy slid them across the table in front of his son. You went back. Curtis looked up at his father with an expression that reminded the old man of when the kid was young. When did you do that? It wasn't long after that weekend, maybe the next Wednesday. I don't recall exactly. I was sure I was going to end up in jail. Weird, they kept all this stuff on paper even back then. Curtis rested his hand on top. Have you read this? Several times. Several times, Jimmy said, especially after the accident. Curtis sighed. You never showed me this before now. I couldn't take the chance at changing time, but I had a hunch you might need them. And since that drive that led me to take them hasn't happened for... Oh gosh, what am I trying to say here? But I had a hunch you might need them. And since that drive that led me to take them has happened for you, I'll say has finally happened for you as a translocation, I think it's okay. Will it prove they did this to me? Jimmy shook his head and then shrugged. Hard to say. These are from a long time ago, but they might prove the experiments really happened. Not quite enough that a lawyer couldn't make you look crazy. Then what? If you convince anyone, they will put you away to be experimented on. The first known time traveler. All right. I got involved with them because I was looking for answers to what was going on with me my whole life. Never knew it was anything like this. Curtis paused and swallowed a few times before he continued. I ended up exactly in the place that caused my condition. I don't know what happens next, Jimmy said. Not sure using this stuff will make it any better, but you have it if you decide to use it. They sat together a long time discussing the past, the future, and all the missed opportunities in their lives.